In this lesson, we will discuss digestion and absorption. As we complete Chapter 2, we will cover all of the following objectives. We'll talk about the path that food takes during digestion and the muscular actions of digestion. We'll talk about the origins and actions of digestive secretions. We'll talk about the anatomical details of the GI tract and how the intestinal cells help to facilitate nutrient absorption. We'll describe the process of nutrient delivery from the GI tract to the body cells by the vascular system and different types of lipoproteins. We'll talk about how hormones, nerves, and bacteria influence the health and activities of the GI tract. And finally, we'll talk briefly about how foodborne illnesses in humans occur and how to avoid these illnesses. So let's get started. Have you ever wondered what 3 things make a healthy GI tract? Well, as a matter of fact, sleep, good nutrition, and regular physical activity are all essential parts of healthy digestion. Our mental state also has a profound effect on digestion and absorption, and we'll learn more about that in this chapter. First, we'll talk about the anatomy of the digestive tract. In other words, what's connected to what? So this slide illustrates in a pictorial fashion the organs of the digestive tract and those organs that I consider associated with the digestive tract, such as the liver and the pancreas. Digestion begins in the mouth. Food then travels down the esophagus to the stomach, from the stomach into the small intestine, from the small intestine into the large intestine, down into the rectum, and finally waste exits the body through the anus. We'll talk in more detail about each of these. The liver and the pancreas as well as the gallbladder have vital functions in digestion. So what exactly is digestion? Digestion is the complex process by which food particles are broken down to smaller absorbable particles. We eat a sandwich, but we absorb nutrients. And all the organs and glands associated with digestion are involved in creating those smaller, more absorbable particles. In the end, we break food down to carbohydrate or sugars, amino acids, which are the smallest parts of proteins, and triglycerides or fatty acids, which are the smallest parts of fat. We also absorb vitamins and minerals and water from food through the cells of the digestive system. Food travels through the digestive tract in this order. Digestion starts in the mouth. The epiglottis opens and allows food into the esophagus. The lower esophageal sphincter opens and allows food into the stomach. When ready, the stomach, connected to the pyloric sphincter, allows the pyloric sphincter to open and food goes into the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum, or some people say duodenum. It then flows into the jejunum, the middle part of the small intestine, the ileum, which is the final part of the small intestine, through the ileocecal valve at the end of the small intestine into the large intestine or colon. What's left in the colon is usually undigested products that eventually become waste. They are stored in the rectum until they are ready to exit the body in defecation, and they exit through the anus. So now let's take a look in more detail at what happens in each part of the digestive system. So first, digestion begins in the mouth. In the mouth, you chew your food to break it into smaller particles. The food mixes with saliva. This saliva contains salivary enzymes or salivary amylase that starts the digestion of carbohydrate. Mixing with saliva also allows the food to become more slippery and easy to swallow. The epiglottis closes over your trachea so that food only enters the esophagus and you don't choke. It's important to prevent food from entering the lungs because if food enters the lungs, you can become ill with with a type of pneumonia, which is not really a good thing. It's called aspiration pneumonia. Some patients have swallowing disorders as the result of stroke or head injuries, and we have to be very careful with the texture of food and liquids that we provide to them because their epiglottis does not close correctly, and food could easily enter the lungs. The upper esophageal sphincter opens and allows the bolus of food to slide down to the stomach. The lower esophageal sphincter ensures that the contents does not slip back up into the esophagus. This is really important because the contents of the stomach are very acidic, and if it were to come back into the esophagus, it could cause damage to the esophagus. Sometimes we call this heartburn. Another word for this, if it happens on a regular basis, is gastroesophageal reflux disease. So we want to keep stomach contents down into the stomach, where the stomach transforms the bolus to chyme, which is essentially a liquefied mixture of the food that we have eaten. Once the food is completely liquefied, the chyme is slowly released bit by bit through the pyloric sphincter at the bottom of the stomach into the small intestine. It's important that this not be released too quickly because we don't want to overwhelm the small intestine with too much contents at one time. Most of digestion and absorption takes place in the small intestine, so that's why we want to make sure that the contents arrive slowly so that the food can be adequately digested and absorbed. In the small intestine, the chyme passes by the common bile duct, which is a connection between the gallbladder and the small intestine and the pancreas. This allows other digestive fluids, such as bile and digestive enzymes, to enter from the gallbladder and the pancreas and mix with the chyme to allow the contents to be further broken down. The chyme travels through the segments of the small intestine so that it slowly gets digested into its smallest components of sugars, amino acids, fatty acids, and triglycerides to complete digestion. Once it passes through the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, digestion is essentially complete. The remaining intestinal contents pass through the ileocecal valve at the bottom of the small intestine into the large intestine or the colon. It passes by the appendix, and usually things don't enter the appendix. As the waste passes through the colon, water and salts are slowly absorbed from the waste, and the waste, as it becomes more solidified, enters the rectum. It stays in the rectum until it is ready to be expelled. The rectal muscles hold back the waste until you are ready to defecate, and then the muscles in the anus allow the waste to pass. Or in other words, you poop. The muscles and glands of the digestive tract are very important. There are cells or groups of cells that secrete materials such as bile and hormones and enzymes that facilitate digestion. And the muscles create the gastrointestinal motility that is needed to move food down the digestive tract and to also move food back and forth to allow it to mix with digestive juices. There are two types of motion in the digestive tract. One is called peristalsis, and this is successive waves of involuntary muscle contractions that allow food to pass along the walls of the GI tract, pushing it slowly downward. Your book describes it as the way something passes through a snake. I like to think of it as what happens if you push on a toothpaste or another tube to slowly allow the contents to move along the tube. Segmentation is another type of movement, muscular movement, that periodically allows for the squeezing or partitioning of the intestine by circular muscles. And this partitioning and squeezing mixes the chyme with the digestive enzymes and other substances that allow the chyme to be further broken down. So these pictures kind of pictorially illustrate both peristalsis and segmentation. You can see in the top set of pictures a squeezing of the contents of the digestive tract ever downward to reach the final destination. The longitudinal and circular muscles of the digestive tract are involved in this. And the second picture is illustrating segmentation, where the circular muscles are partitioning off and kind of moving back and forth and squeezing the contents to allow the digestive juices to mix with the chyme. The stomach has the strongest muscles in all of the GI tract. It has several types of muscle, and it is really allowing for contents to move along and mix and get really liquefied so that once it moves into the small intestine, it is in a state that the enzymes there can maximally work on digesting the contents. There are both circular and longitudinal muscles, inner and outer and middle muscles of the stomach. And also the stomach has folds that allows it to stretch. You may want to think about what happens when you eat Thanksgiving dinner. You know that your stomach really can expand quite a bit to accommodate a large meal. You might not feel too great after you eat a large meal, but your stomach is able to accommodate that. Considering the fact that it's about the size of your hand, that is a pretty amazing fact. So let's have our first knowledge check here. Once food is swallowed, it travels through the digestive tract in this order. Is it small intestine, stomach, esophagus, large intestine? Esophagus, stomach, large intestine, liver? Small intestine, large intestine, stomach, esophagus? Or esophagus, stomach, small intestine, or large intestine? And of course, the answer is D. Esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. Along the way, it is passing through the lower esophageal sphincter. It is passing through the pyloric sphincter and the ileocecal valve.